I hope you're all doing well. Brangus, Kara, always good to see you. How's everybody doing tonight? Lurking is permitted. That is totally okay. Lurking is permitted. Ready to lurk and get some chill reading time. Excellent. I am also looking forward to it. Brangus, I hope you're doing well, my brother. See if I can move this a skosh closer. Package shows to be there tomorrow. Let's go. Let's go. That's awesome. Really appreciate you, Brangus. Received a package today from Darker Bunnies. So we're going to be ripping into that also on Thursday, seeing what's in there. But yeah, really looking forward to it, Brangus. And I appreciate you, brother. Hope you're ready to jump back into Mars. I was really, really looking forward to it. In fact, I would say today I woke up and this was actually my first thought of the day, which is kind of odd because typically I don't think about the reading until later in the day, but this was the first time I woke up and I was like, oh, get to keep going on John Carter. Excellent. Katrina, Leighton, Layla, I hope you are all doing well. Although, I hope you're doing good, boo. It's good to see you. How was your day? How was everybody's day? We're just going to stick with tradition and give it to the time of the Rubik's Cube solve here. Little 4x4. Lots of naps. Leighton, did you get your wheel spin? Sprangus asked. Oh, it was ALB. Yeah, ALB was gone today. I didn't have any time to jump in there with work. Work got a little bit nuts there at the end. Then it kind of cooled off a bit, but I hope you win something amazing, Leighton. Okay, step one done. Also, can everybody hear me okay? Is the mic coming through loud and clear? All right, let's go. Hear you just fine, excellent. Didn't watch. Bit hectic for a Monday. Was really looking forward to story time. Let's go. I'm really glad that I can give you that tonight, Brangus. I'm also very much looking forward to it. Less about the story, although the story is on my mind, but more that I get to hang out with all of you for the night. Uncle Kit, we are doing good, and Nana is getting better every day. Let's go. Yes, Coco, I did, but didn't get to see what I won. As stuck in ad. Oh, no. Can you scroll back real quick and see what it is that you got? I hate when that happens. Right when it comes time, it's like an ad hits you. Oh, let's cheat a little. Two pairs that way. Yep, that's how you know it's been a long day. I am struggle busting through this right now. That was a happy accident, though. Did you hit gold? Yeah, should definitely scroll back and take a look at it real quick. Yep, I was looking forward to the nice chill vibes that y'all bring to the streams on Monday. Where's my odd one out? Oh, there it is. Here should still be one more odd. There. How are the horses in Homestead doing? No, 2 silver and 3 brown. Oh, well, silver is not bad. Silver can hit sometimes. You know, the per se easy part, which is just putting it all right. There. This one is. The foal and the mama, excellent. That's always good to hear. Glad that they're all doing well. Sean Bowden, how's it going, brother? Hope you are doing well and having an amazing day. There we go. Yeah, it took about 2 minutes longer than it should have. Where are we at? Right at about the 8-minute mark, so we'll give it 2 more minutes and then we'll get going. Glad the horses are doing well, Katrina. I'm doing all right. It was a Monday of Mondays. Not too bad, but definitely feel it. This chair feels nice. Hey, what's up, Ryan Tran? I hope you're doing well. Oh, don't worry about the link drops tonight, bud. I don't know if there's enough people in here. As much as I appreciate it. You can just take it easy, have the night off. It is definitely a Monday night, nice, relaxed, chill stream. I thought it was Sunday because ALB threw it all off. I appreciate you, Ryan. And man, I am so sorry. I know I've asked you multiple times in multiple streams, and maybe you answered, maybe not, but I still owe you an artwork. And I was gonna do a Fuecoco for you because I know that you like the Cutie Mon, but was there a particular one that you wanted? Because I'm excited that I get to paint for the amazing Ryan Tran. What I want on AOB's wheel spin. Ooh, what did you win? I probably wouldn't guess. First edition Shadowless Charizard from base set? Maybe I shouldn't have said that. Now it probably wouldn't seem so good. No, what did you win, bud? Got 4 of y'all in here. Appreciate my readers lining up. No, Unigaba, Vaporeon, and a PSA 10. No shot. Congratulations, Sean Bowden. That is an incredible, one-of-a-kind piece of history. Yeah, I did, but sort of changed my mind and still want to think. Okay, no worries at all, my friend. Think as long as you need to. I will definitely be here and ready. I'll be here and ready. Feel free to challenge me. It doesn't have to be Pokemon. It can be any any subject matter. I just say that because 3D is a little bit tough, but so something better than yeah. I agree. I agree because there are thousands of Zards out there. There's only a handful of those, and even less in a PSA 10. So congratulations, Sean. That is awesome. What's up, Matt? I hope you're doing well, brother. Hope you're doing well. We are just about to get into it. We just passed that 10-minute mark here. So we're about to get into our read for the night. And I thank you all for being here on Monday. That you all were the first thing that I thought about when I woke up. Just one of me to catch them all. Gotta catch them all. Gotta catch them all. But if we recall, let me go ahead and take a look at just the last bit of the last chapter here. Oh yeah, that's right. John Carter was in a battle, and he was a big guy, pretty big guy. And the end of the last chapter was he was getting ran through with his sword, so he got stabbed, and he could feel it. And then the chapter ended, and that's where the stream ended. I thought it was perfect, so now we're going to get into the rest of it. I can assure you, John Carter is okay, otherwise the rest of the series would probably be incredibly short. But it was incredible. That was chapter 8 through 14. Now we're going to jump into chapter 15 through 21, meaning there's only one more stream after this for this book, and then we'll decide. We're probably going to keep on going with the John Carter series. So once more, appreciate you guys being here. I hope you enjoy. Grab your favorite beverage, curl up next to the fire, and yeah, get ready for some reads. Hey, Heavy D, I hope you're doing well, brother. Hey, Missions. Always good to see you, man. Dropping in to say hi. 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 We're just about to start it. I am relaxed. I'm really tired. I just got off of work. I sat down and I started the stream. So I'm really looking forward to early bedtime, big old dinner, and this read. John Carter and Mars. A Princess of Mars, but it's John Carter series. And we're going to get into chapter 15. It is still bright out. The sun will go away while we're streaming, so I thought that kind of odd as well. But yeah, the sun kind of blasts my living room window at the end. So it's kind of weird that it's like bedtime for some, but the sun's still up here. Happy reading streaming, absolutely. And chapter 15 is called Sola Tells Me Her Story. When consciousness returned, and, as I soon learned, I was down but a moment, I sprang quickly to my feet, searching for my sword. And there I found it, buried to the hilt in the green beast of Zod, who lay stone dead upon the ochre moss of the ancient sea bottom. As I regained my full senses, I found his weapon piercing my left breast, but only through the flesh and muscles which covered my ribs, entering near the center of my chest and coming out below the shoulder. As I had lunged, I had turned so that his sword merely passed beneath the muscle, inflicting a painful but not dangerous wound. Removing the blade from my body, I also regained my own, and turning my back upon his ugly carcass, I moved, sick, sore, and disgusted, toward the chariots which bore my retinue and my belongings. A murmur of Martian applause greeted me, but I cared not for it. Bleeding and weak, I reached my woman who, accustomed to such happenings, dressed my wounds, applying the wonderful healing and remedial agents which make only the most instantaneous of death blows fatal. Give a Martian woman a chance, and death must take a back seat. They soon had me patched up so that, except for weakness from loss of blood and a little soreness around the wound, I suffered no great distress from this thrust, which, under earthly treatment, undoubtedly would have put me flat on my back for days. As soon as they were through with me, I hastened to the chariot of Deja Thoris, where I found my poor Sola with her chest swatched in bandages, but apparently little the worse for her encounter with Sarkoja, whose dagger it seemed to have struck the edge of one Sola's metal breast or ornaments and thus deflected and inflicted but a slight flesh wound. As I approached, I found Deja Thoris laying prone under her silks and furs, her lithe form racked with sobs, but she did not notice my presence, nor did she hear me speaking with Sola, who was standing a short distance from the vehicle. "Is she injured?" I asked Sola, indicating Deja Thoris by an inclination of my head. "No," she answered. "She thinks that you are dead." "And that her grandmother's cat may now have one to polish its teeth?" I queried, smiling. "I think you wrong her, John Carter," said Sola. "I do not understand either her ways or yours, but I am sure the granddaughter of 10,000 Jedeks would never grieve like this over any who held but the highest claim upon her affections. They are a proud race, but they are just, and they, as are all Barsoomians. And you must have hurt or wronged her grievously that she will not admit your existence living, though she mourns you dead." "Tears are a strange sight upon Barsoom," she continued, "and so it is difficult for me to interpret them. I have seen but two people weep in all my life, other than Deja Thoris. One wept from sorrow, the other from baffled rage. The first was my mother, years ago, before they killed her. The other was Sarkoja, when they dragged her from me today." "Your mother!" I exclaimed. "But Sola, you could not have known your mother, child." "I did, and my father also," she added. "If you would like to hear the strange and un-Barsoomian story, come to the chariot tonight, John Carter, and I will tell you that of which I have never spoken in all my life before. And now the signal has been given to resume the march. You must go." "I will come tonight, Sola," I promised. "Be sure to tell Deja Thoris I am alive and well. I shall not force myself upon her, and be sure that you do not let her know I saw her tears. If she would speak with me, I but await her command." Sola mounted the chariot, which was swinging into its place in line, and I hastened to my waiting thoat and galloped to my station beside Thars Tarkas at the rear of the column. We made a most imposing and awe-inspiring spectacle as we stung out across the yellow landscape. The 250 ornate and brightly colored chariots, preceded by the advancing guard of some 200 mounted warriors and chieftains riding 5 abreast and 100 yards apart, and followed by a like number in the same formation, with a score of more of flankards on either side and 50 extra mastodons or heavy-draught animals known as zititters, and the 500 or 600 extra thoats of the warriors running loose within the hollow square formed by the surrounding warriors. The gleaming metal and jewels of the gorgeous ornaments of the men and women duplicated in the trappings of the zitardars and thoats, and interspersed with the flashing colors of magnificent silks and furs and feathers, lent a barbaric splendor to the caravan, which would have turned an East Indian poignant green with envy. The enormous broad tires of the chariots and the padded feet of the animals brought forth no sound from the moss-covered sea bottom, and so we moved in utter silence, like some huge phantasmagoria, except when the stillness was broken by the guttural sound and growling of a goaded zititter, or the squealing of fighting thoats. The green Martians conversed but little, and then usually the monosyllables, low, and like a faint rumbling of distant thunder. We traversed the trackless waste of moss which, bending to the pressure of broad tire and padded foot, rose up again behind us, leaving no sign that we had passed. We might indeed have been the wraiths of the departed dead upon the sea of that dying planet, for all the sound or sign we made in passing. It was the first march of the large body of men and animals and had ever witnessed, which raised no dust and left no spore, for there was no dust upon Mars except in the cultivated districts during the winter months, and even then the absence of high winds renders it almost unnoticeable. We camped that night at the foot of the hills we had been approaching for 2 days, and which marked the southern boundary of this particular sea. Our animals had been 2 days without drink, nor had they any water for nearly 2 months, not since shortly after leaving Thark. But as Tarkus explained to me, they require but little and can live almost indefinitely upon the moss which covers the barsoom, and which, he told me, holds in its tiny stem significant moisture to meet the limited demands of the animals. After partaking of my evening meal of cheese-like food and vegetable milk, I sought out Sola, whom I found working by the light of the torch upon some of Tarkus' trappings. She looked up at my approach, her face lighting with pleasure and with welcome. "I am glad you came," she said. "Dejah sleeps, and I am lonely. Mine own people do not care for me, John Carter. I am too unlike them. It is a sad fate, since I must live my life among them. And I often wish that I were a true green Martian woman without love and without hope. But I have known love, and so I am lost. I promised to tell you my story, or rather the story of my parents. From what I have learned of you and the ways of your people, I am sure that the tale will not seem strange to you, but among green Martians it has no parallel within the memory of the oldest living Thark, nor do our legends hold many similar tales. My mother was rather small, in fact too small to be allowed the responsibilities of maternity, as our chieftains breed principally for size. She was also less cold and cruel than most green Martian women, and caring little for their society. She often roamed the deserted avenues of Thark alone, or went and sat amongst the wild flowers that the deck in the nearby hills, thinking thoughts and wishing wishes, which I believe I alone among Tharkian women today may understand, for I am not the child of my mother. For am I not the child of my mother? And there, among the hills, she met a young warrior, whose duty it was to guard the feeding Zatitters and Thoats and see that they roamed but not beyond the hills. They spoke at first only of such things as interest in community of Tharkus, but gradually, as they came to meet more often, and as was now quite evident to both, no longer by chance, they talked about themselves, their likes, their ambitions, and their hopes. She trusted him, and told him of the awful repugnance she felt for the cruelties of their kind, for the hideous, loveless lives they must lead. And then she waited for the storm of denunciation to break from his cold, hard lips, but instead he took her in his arms and he kissed her. They kept their love a secret for 6 long years. She, my mother, was of the retinue of the great tall Hodges, while her lover was a simple warrior wearing only his own metal. Had their defection from the traditions of the Tharks been discovered, both would have paid a penalty in the great arena before Tal's Hodges and the assembled hordes. The egg from which I came was hidden beneath a great glass vessel upon the highest and most inaccessible of the partially ruined towers of the ancient Thark. Once each year my mother visited it. For the 5 long years it lay there in the process of incubation. She dared not come oftener, for in the mighty guilt of her conscience she feared that her every move was watched. During this period my father gained great distinction as a warrior, and had taken the medal from several chieftains. His love for my mother had never diminished, and his own ambition in life was to reach the point where he might wrest the medal from Tal Hodges himself, and thus, as the ruler of Tharkus, be free to claim her as his own, as well as, by the might of his power, protect the child, which otherwise would be quickly dispatched should the truth become known. It was a wild dream, that of wresting the medal from Tal Hodges in 5 short years, but this advance was rapid, and he soon stood high in the Council of Thark. But one day, the chance was lost forever, insofar as it could come in time to save his loved ones, for he was ordered away upon a long expedition to the ice-clad south, to make war upon the natives there and despoil them of their furs, for such is a manner of the green Barsoomian. He does not labor for what he cannot wrest in battle from others. He was gone for 4 years, and when he returned, all had been over for 3. But about a year after his departure, and shortly before the time for the return of the expedition, which had gone forth to fetch the fruits of a community incubator, the egg had hatched. Thereafter, my mother continued to keep me in the old tower, visiting me nightly and lavishing upon me the love the community life would have robbed us both of. She hoped, upon the return of the expedition from the incubator, to mix me with the other young assigned to the quarters of Talhages, and thus escape the fate which would surely follow discovery of her sin against the ancient traditions of the Green Men. She taught me rapidly the language and customs of my kind, and one night she told me the story I have told you up to this point, impressing upon me the necessity for absolute secrecy and the great caution I must exercise after she had placed me with the other young Tharks, to permit no one to guess that I was further advanced in education than they, nor by any sign to divulge in the presence of others my affection for her, or my knowledge of my parentage. And then, drawing me close to her, she whispered in my ear the name of my father. And then a light flashed out upon the darkness of the tower chamber, and there stood Sarkoja, her gleaming, baleful eyes fixed in the frenzy of loathing and contempt upon my mother. The torrent of hatred and abuse she poured out upon her turned my young heart cold in terror. That she had heard the entire story was apparent, and that she had suspected something wrong from my mother's long nightly absences from her quarters accounted for her presence there on that fateful night. One thing she had not heard, nor did she know. She whispered the whispered name of my father. This was apparent from her repeated demands upon my mother to disclose the name of her partner in sin, but no amount of abuse or threats could wring this from her. And to save me from needless torture, she lied, for she told Sarkoja that she alone knew, nor would she even tell her child. With final imprecations, Sarkoja hastened away to tell Talhages to report her discovery, and while she was gone, my mother, wrapping me in the silks and furs of her night coverings, so that it was scarcely noticeable, descended to the streets and ran wildly away toward the outskirts of the city in the direction which led to the far south, out toward the men whose protection she might not claim, but on whose face she wished to look once more before she died. As we neared the city's southern extremity, a sound came to us from across the mossy flat, from the direction of the only pass through the hills which led to the gates, the pass by which the caravans from either north or south or east or west would enter the city. The sounds we heard were the squeaking of thoats and grumbling of zatitters, and with the occasional clank of arms which announced the approach of the body of warriors. The thought uppermost in her mind was that it was my father's return from the expedition, but the cunning of the Thark held her from headlong and participate flight to greet him. Retreating into the shadows of the doorway, she awaited the coming of the cavalcade, which shortly entered the avenue, breaking its formation and thronging in thoroughfare from wall to wall. As the head of the procession passed us, the lesser moon swung clear of the overhanging roofs and lit up the scene with all the brilliancy of her wondrous light. My mother shrank further back into the friendly shadows, and from her hiding place saw that the expedition was not that of my father, but the returning caravan bearing the young Tharks. Instantly her plan was formed, and as the great chariot swung close to our hiding place, she slipped stealthily in upon the trailing tailboard, crouching low in the shadow of the high side, straining me to her bosom in a frenzy of love. She knew what I did not, that never again after that night would she hold me to her breast, nor was it likely that we would look upon each other's face again. In the confusion of the plaza, she mixed me with the other children, whose guardians during the journey were now free to relinquish their responsibility. We were herded together into a great room, fed by women who had not accompanied the expedition, and the next day we were parceled out among the retinues of the chieftains. I never saw my mother after that night. She was imprisoned by Talhages, and every effort, including the most horrible and shameful torture, was brought to bear upon her to wring from her lips the name of my father, but she remained steadfast and loyal, dying at last amidst the laughter of Talhages and his chieftains during some awful torture she was undergoing. I learned afterward that she told them that she had killed me to save me from my like fate at her hands, and that she had thrown my body into to the white apes. Sarkoja alone disbelieved her, and I feel to this day that she suspects my true origin, but does not dare oppose me at the present, at all events, because she also guesses, I am sure, the identity of my father. When he returned from his expedition and learned the story of my mother's fate, I was present as Tal Hodges told him, but never by the quiver of a muscle did he betray the slightest emotion. Only he did not laugh as Tal Hodges gleefully described her death struggles. From that moment on, he was the cruelest of the cruel, and I am awaiting the day when he shall win his goal of the goal of his ambition and feel the carcass of Tal Hodges beneath his foot. For I am as sure that he but awaits the opportunity to wreak this terrible vengeance, and that his great love is as strong in his breast as when it first transfigured him nearly 40 years ago. And I am that we sit here upon the edge of the world, oh, the ocean, while sensible people sleep, John Carter. And your father, Sola, is he with us now? I asked. Yes, she replied. But he does not know me for what I am, nor does he know who betrayed my mother to Tal Hodges. I alone know my father's name, and only I and Tal Hodges and Sarkoja know that it was she who carried the tale that brought the death and torture upon her he loved. We sat silent for a few moments. She wrapped in gloomy thoughts of her terrible past, and I in pity for the poor creatures whom the heartless, senseless custom of their race had doomed to loveless lives of cruelty and the hate. Presently she spoke. John Carter, if ever a real man walk the cold, dead bosom of Barsoom, you are one. I know that I can trust you, and because the knowledge may someday help you or him or Deja Thors or myself, I am going to tell you the name of my father. Nor place any restrictions or conditions upon your tongue. When the time comes, speak the truth if it seems best to you. I trust you because I know that you are not cursed with the terrible trait of absolute and unwavering truthfulness. Trait of absolute and unswerving truthfulness, that you could lie like one of your own Virginia gentlemen if a lie would save others from sorrow or suffering. My father's name is Tarkus. Oh, no shot. Hey, Laura Lovejoy, how are you doing? Radio Hobbies, what's going on, man? It's good to see you. Good to see y'all. Hope you're all doing well. I did not see that coming. I had somebody else in mind, but Tarkus, father of Sola. That's a Moscow tool that will help us later. Hope you're all enjoying the first chapter thus far. Still got 4 of you in here. Let's move into chapter 16. We plan escape. Hiya. What's up, Christina? I hope you're doing well. The remainder of our journey to Thark was uneventful. We were 20 days upon the road, crossing 2 sea bottoms and passing through or around a number of ruined cities, mostly smaller than Kored. Twice we crossed the famous Martian waterways or canals, so called by our earthly astronomers. When we approached these points, the warrior would be sent far ahead with a powerful field glass, and if no great body of red Martian troops was in sight, we would advance as close as possible without chance of being seen, and then camp until dark, when we would slowly approach the cultivated tract and, locating one of the numerous broad highways which cross these areas at regular intervals, creep silently and stealthily across to the arid lands upon the other side. It required 5 hours to make one of these crossings without a single halt, and the other consumed the entire night, so that we were just leaving the confines of the high-walled fields when the sun broke out upon us. Crossing in the darkness as we did, I was unable to see but little, except as the nearer moon, in her wild and ceaseless hurtling through the Barsoomian heavens, lit up little patches of the landscape from time to time. disclosing walled fields and low, rambling buildings, presenting much the appearance of earthly farms. There were many trees, methodically arranged, and some of them were of enormous height. There were animals in some of the enclosures, and they announced their presence by terrified squealings and snortings as they scented our queer wild beasts and wilder human beings. Only once did I perceive a human being, and that was at the intersection of our crossroads with the wild white turnpike that cuts each cultivated district along longitudinally as its exact center. At its exact center. The fellow must have been sleeping beside the road, for as I came abreast of him, he raised upon one elbow, and after a single glance at the approaching caravan, leapt shrieking to his feet and fled madly down the road, scaling a nearby wall with the agility of a scared cat. The Tharks paid him not the slightest attention. They were not out upon the warpath, and the only sign that I had that they had seen him was a quickening of the pace of the caravan as we hastened toward the broadening desert which marked our entrance to the realm of Talhajas. Not once did I have speech with Deja Thoris, and she sent no word to me that I would be welcome at her chariot, and my foolish pride kept me from making any advances. I verily believe that a man's way to a woman is an inverse ratio to his prowess among men. The weakling and the saphead have often great ability to charm the fair sex, while the fighting man who can face 1,000 real dangers unafraid sits hiding in the shadows like some frightened child. Just 30 days after my advent upon Barsoom, we entered the ancient city of Thark, from whose long-forgotten people this horde of green men had stolen even their name. The hordes of Thark number some 30,000 souls and are divided into 25 communities. Each community has its own Jed and lesser chieftains, but all are under the rule of Talhajas. Jedek of Thark, 5 communities make their headquarters at the city of Thark, and the balance are scattered among the deserted cities of ancient Mars throughout the district claimed by Talhajas. We made our entry into the great central plaza early in the afternoon. There were no enthusiastic friendly greetings for the returned expedition. Those who chanced to be in sight spoke the names of the warriors or women with whom they came in direct contact, in the formal greeting of their kind. But when it was discovered that they brought 2 captives, a greater interest was aroused, and Deja Thoris and I were the centers of inquiring groups. We were soon assigned to new quarters, and the balance of the day was devoted to settling ourselves to the changed conditions. My home was now upon an avenue leading into the plaza from the south, the main artery down which we had marched from the gates of the city. I was at the far end of the square and had an entire building to myself. The same grandeur of architecture which was so noticeable and characteristic of Corid was in evidence here, only, if that were possible, on a larger and richer scale. My quarters would have been suitable for housing the greatest of earthly emperors, but to these queer creatures nothing about a building appealed to them but its size and the enormity of its chambers. The larger the building, the more desirable. And so Talhajas occupied what must have been an enormous public building, the largest in the city, but entirely unfit for residence purposes. The next largest was reserved for Lorquas Pommel, the next for the Jed of lesser rank, and so on to the bottom of the list of 5 Jeds. The warriors occupied the buildings with the chieftains, to whom retinues they belonged to, or, if they preferred, sought shelter among any of the thousands of untenanted buildings in their own quarter of the town, each community being assigned a certain section of the city. The selection of building had to be made in accordance with these divisions, except in so far as the Jeds were concerned, they all occupying edifices which fronted upon the plaza. Except in so far as the Jeds were concerned, they all occupying edifices which fronted upon the plaza. Just sounded weird. When I had finally put my house in order, rather seeing that it had been done, it was nearing sunset, and I hastened out with the intention of locating Sola and her charges, as I had determined upon having speech with Deja Thoris or trying to impress on her the necessity of our at least patching up a truce until I could find some way of aiding her to escape. I searched in vain until the upper rim of the great red sun was just disappearing behind the horizon, and then I spied the ugly head of Woola peering from a second-story window on the opposite side of the very street where I was quartered, but nearer the plaza. Without waiting for further invitation, I bolted up to the winding runway which led to the second floor, and entering a great chamber at the front of the building, was greeted by the frenzied Woola, who threw his great carcass upon me, nearly hurling me to the floor. The poor old fellow was so glad to see me that I thought he would devour me, his head split from ear to ear, showing his 3 rows of tusks and his hobgoblin smile. Quieting him with a word of command and a caress, I looked hurriedly through the approaching gloom for a sign of Dejah Thoris, and then, not seeing her, I called her name. There was an answering murmur from a far corner of an apartment, and with a couple of quick strides I was standing beside her where she was crouched among the furs and silks upon an ancient carved wooden seat. As I waited, she rose to her full height, and looking me straight in the eye, said, "What would Dotar Sojat, Thark of Dejah Thoris, his captive?" Dejah Thoris, I do not know how I have angered you. It was furthest from my desire to hurt or offend you, whom I had hoped to protect and comfort. Have none of me, if it is your will, but that you must aid me in effecting your escape. If such a thing be possible, it's not my request, but my command. When you are safe once more at your father's court, you may do with me as you please, but from now on until the day I am your master, and you must obey and aid me. She looked at me long and earnestly, and I thought that she was softening toward me. "I understand your words, Dokar Sojat," she replied, "but you I do not understand. You are a queer mixture of a child and a man, of brute and noble. I only wish that I might read your heart. Look down at your feet, Dejah Thoris. It lies there now where it had lain since the other night in Corin, and where it will even lie beating alone for you until death stills it forever." She took a little step towards me, her beautiful hands outstretched in a strange groping gesture. "What do you mean, John Carter?" she whispered. "What are you saying to me?" "I am saying what I had promised myself that I would not say to you, at least until you were no longer a captive among the green men. What from your attitude towards me for the past 20 days I had thought never to say to you, I am saying, Dejah Thoris, that I am yours, body and soul, to serve you, to fight for you, and to die for you. Only one thing I ask of you in return, and that is that you make no sign, either of condemnation or of approbation of my words until you are safe among your own people, and that whatever sentiments you harbor towards me, they may not influenced or colored by gratitude. Whatever I may do to serve you will be prompted solely from selfish motives, since it gives me more pleasure to serve you than not." "I will respect your wishes, John Carter, because I understand the motives which prompt them, and I accept your service no more willingly than I bow to your authority. Your word shall be my law. I have twice wronged you in my thoughts, and again I ask your forgiveness." Further conversation of a personal nature was prevented by the entrance of Sola, who was much agitated and wholly unlike her usual calm and possessed self. "That horrible Sarkoja has been before Tahages," she cried, "and from what I've heard upon the plaza, there is little hope for either of you." "What do they say?" inquired Dejah Thoris. "That you will be thrown to the wild callets dogs in the great arena as soon as the hordes have assembled for the yearly games." "Sola," I said, "you are a Thark, but you hate and loathe the custom of your people as much as we do. Will you not accompany us in one supreme effort to escape? I am sure that Dejah Thoris can offer you a home and protection among her people, and your fate can be no worse among them than it must ever be here." "Yes," cried Dejah Thoris, "come with us, Sola. You will be better off among the red men of Helium than you are here, and I can promise you that not only a home with us, but the love and affection your nature craves, and which must always be denied you by the customs of your own race. Come with us, Sola. We might go without you, but your fate would be terrible if they thought you had connived to aid us. I know that even that fear would not tempt you to interfere in our escape, but we want you with us. We want you to come to a land of sunshine and happiness among a people who know the meaning of love, sympathy, and of gratitude. Say that you will, Sola. Tell me that you will. A great waterway which leads to Helium is about 50 miles to the south, murmured Sola, half to herself. A swift thoat might make it in 3 hours, and then to Helium it is 500 miles, most of the way through thinly settled districts. They would know, and they would follow us. We might hide among the great trees for a time, but the chances are small indeed for escape. They would follow us to the very gates of Helium, and they would not take toll of life at every step. You do not know them. Is there no other way we might reach Helium? I asked. Can you not draw me a rough map of the country we must traverse, Dejathoris? Yes, she replied, and taking a great diamond from her hair, she drew upon the marble floor the first map of Barsoomian territory I had ever seen. It was crisscrossed in every direction with long straight lines, sometimes running parallel, sometimes converging towards some great circle. The lines, she said, were waterways, the circles, cities, and the one far to the northwest of us, she pointed out, as Helium. There were other cities closer, but she said she feared to enter any of them, as they were not all friendly towards Helium. Finally, after studying a map carefully in the moonlight which now flooded the room, I pointed out a waterway far to the north of us, which also seemed to lead to Helium. Does not this pierce your grandfather's territory? I asked. Yes, she answered, but it is 200 miles north of us, and it is one of the waterways we crossed on the trip to Thark. They would never suspect that we would try for that distant waterway, I answered, and that is why I think it is the best route for our escape. Sola agreed with me, and it was decided that we should leave Thark this same night, just as quickly, in fact, as I could find a saddle for my thoats. Sola was to ride one, and Dejathoris and I the other, each of us carrying significant food and drink to last us for 2 days, since the animals could not be urged too rapidly for so long a distance. I directed Sola to proceed with Dejathoris along one of the less frequented avenues to the southern boundary of the city, where I would overtake them with the thoats as quickly as possible. Then, leaving them to gather what food and silks and furs we were to need, I slipped quietly to the rear of the first floor and entered the courtyard where our animals were moving restlessly about, as was their habit before settling down for the night. In the shadows of the buildings, and out beneath the radiance of the Martian moons, moved the great herd of thoats and zitiders, the latter grunting their low gutturals, and the former occasionally emitting a sharp squeal, which denotes the most habitual state of rage in which these creatures pass their existence. They were quieter now, owing to the absence of man, but as they scented me, they became more restless, and their hideous noises increased. It was risky business, this entering a paddock of thoats alone and at night, first because their increasingly noisiness might warn the nearby warriors that something was amiss, and also because for the slightest cause, or for no cause at all, some great bull thoat might take it upon himself to lead a charge upon me. Having no desire to waken their nasty tempers upon such a night as this, where so much depended upon secrecy and dispatch, I hugged the shadows of the buildings, ready at an instant's warning to leap to the safety of a nearby door or window. Thus I moved silently to the great gates which open upon the streets at the back of the courtyard, and as I neared the exit, I called softly to my 2 animals. How I thanked the kind Providence in which had given me the foresight to win the love and confidence of these wild, dumb brutes. For presently, from the far side of the court, I saw 2 huge bulks forcing their way towards me through the surging mountains of flesh. They came quite close to me, rubbing their muzzles against my body and nosing for bits of food that I was always with my practice to reward them with. Opening the gates, I ordered the 2 giant beasts to pass out, and then slipping quietly after them, I closed the portals behind me. I did not saddle or mount the animals there, but instead walked quietly in the shadows of the buildings towards the unfrequented avenue which led toward the point I had arranged to meet Dejathoris and Sola. With the noiselessness of the disembodied spirits, we moved stealthily along the deserted streets, but not until we were within sight of the plain beyond the city did I commence to breathe freely. I was sure that Sola and Dejathoris would find no difficulty in reaching our rendezvous undetected. But with my great thoats, I was not so sure for myself, as it was quite unusual for warriors to leave the city after dark. In fact, there was no place for them to go within any but a long ride. I reached the appointed meeting place safely, but as Deja Thoris and Sola were not there, I led my animals into the entrance hall of one of the large buildings, presuming that one of the other women of the same household may have come in to speak with Sola, and so delayed their departure. I did not feel any undue apprehension until nearly an hour had passed without a sign of them, and by the time another half hour had crawled away, I was becoming filled with grave anxiety. Then there broke upon the stillness of the night the sound of an approaching party, which, from the noise, I knew could be no fugitives creeping stealthily towards liberty. Soon the party was near me, and from the black shadows of my entranceway I perceived a score of mounted warriors who, in passing, dropped a dozen words that fetched my heart clean to the top of my head. He would likely have arranged to meet them just without the city. And so I heard no more. They had passed on, but it was enough. Our plan had been discovered, and the chances for escape from now on to the fearful end would be small indeed. My one hope now was to return undetected to the quarters of Deja Thoris and learn what fact had overtaken her. What fate had overtaken her, but how to do it with these great monstrous thoats upon my hands? Now that the city probably was aroused by the knowledge of my escape, was a problem of no mean proportion. Suddenly, an idea occurred to me, and acting on my knowledge of the construction of the buildings on these ancient Martian cities, with a hollow court within the center of each square, I groped my way blindly through the dark chambers, calling the great thoats after me. They had difficulty in negotiating some of the doorways, but as the buildings fronting the city's principal exposures were all designed upon the magnificent scale, they were able to wiggle through without sticking fast, and thus we finally made the inner court, where I found, as I had expected, the usual carpet of moss-like vegetation, which would prove their food and drink until I could return them to their own enclosure. That they would be as quiet and contented here as elsewhere I was confident, nor was there but the remotest possibility that they would be discovered, as the green men had no great desire to enter these outlying buildings, which were frequented by the only thing, I believe, which caused them the sensation of fear, the great white apes of Barsoom. Removing the saddle trappings, I hid them just within the rear doorway of the building through which I had entered the court, and turning the beast loose, quickly made my way across the court to the rear of the buildings upon the further side, and thence to the avenue beyond. Waiting in the doorway of the building until I was assured that no one was approaching, I hurried across the opposite side and through the first doorway to the court beyond, thus crossing through the court after court, with only the slightest chance of detection, which the necessary crossing of the avenues entailed. I made my way in safety to the courtyard in the rear of Deja Thoris's quarters. Here, of course, I found the beast of the warriors who quartered in the adjacent buildings, and the warriors themselves I might expect to meet within if I entered. But fortunately for me, I had another and safer method of reaching the upper story where Deja Thoris should be found, and after first determining as nearly as possible which of the buildings she occupied, for I had never observed them before from the court side, I took advantage of my relative great strength and agility and sprang upward until I grasped the sill of the second-story window, which I thought to be in the rear of her apartment. Drawing myself inside the room, I moved stealthily toward the front of the building, and not until I had quite reached the doorway of her room was I made aware by voices that it was occupied. I did not rush headlong in, but listened without to assure myself that it was Deja Thoris and that it was safe to venture within. It was well indeed that I took this precaution, for the conversation I heard was in low gutturals, the low gutturals of men. And the words which finally came to me proved the most timely warning. The speaker was a chieftain, and he was giving orders to 4 of his warriors. "And when he returns to this chamber," he was saying, "as he surely will when he finds she does not meet him at the city's edge, you 4 are to spring upon him and disarm him. It will require the combined strength of all of you to do it if the reports they bring back from court are correct. When you have him fast bound, bear him to the vaults beneath the Jetic quarters, and chain him securely, where he may be found when Talhajas wishes him. Allow him to speak with none, nor permit any other to enter his apartment before he comes. There will be no danger of the girl returning, for by this time she is safe in the arms of Talhajas. And may all her ancestors have pity upon her, for Talhajas will have none. The great Sarkoja has done a noble knight's work. I go, and if you fail to capture him when he comes, I commend your carcasses to the cold bottom of Ys. Ooh. Okay. Tried to escape, didn't work out. Yuna! Excellent. It's good to see you. No worries at all. Appreciate you. It's good to see you, Yuna. I hope you're having a great day. We're just moving right along. Moving right along. All right. How will they get out of this? Chapter 17. A costly recapture. As the speaker ceased, he turned to leave the apartment by the door where I was standing, but I needed to wait no longer. I had heard enough to fill my soul with dread, and stealing quietly away, I returned to the courtyard by the way I had come. My plan of action was formed upon the instant, and crossing the square and the bordering avenue upon the opposite side, I soon stood within the courtyard of Talhajas. The brilliantly lighted apartments of the first floor told me where first to seek, and advancing to the windows, I peered within. I soon discovered that my approach was not to be the easy thing I had hoped, for the rear rooms bordering the court were filled with warriors and women. I then glanced up at the stories above, discovering that the third was apparently unlighted, and so decided to make my entrance to the building from that point. It was the work of but a moment for me to reach the windows above, and soon I had drawn myself within the sheltering shadows of the unlighted third floor. Fortunately, the rooms I had selected were unattended, and creeping noisily to the corridor beyond, I discovered a light in the apartments ahead of me. Reaching what appeared to be a doorway, I discovered that it was but an opening upon an immense inner chamber, which towered from the first floor 2 stories below me. To the dome-like roof of the building high above my head. The floor of this great circular hall was thronged with chieftains, warriors, and women, and at one end was a great raised platform upon which squatted the most hideous beast I had ever put my eyes upon. He had all the cold, hard, cruel, terrible features of the green warriors, but accentuated and debased by the animal passions to which he had given himself over the many years. There was not a mark of dignity or pride upon his bestial countenance, while his enormous bulk spread itself out upon the platform where he squatted like some huge devil fish, his 6 limbs accentuating the similarity of a horrible and startling manner. But the sight that froze me with apprehension was that of Dejathoris and Sola standing there before him, and the fiendish leer of him as he let his great protruding eyes gloat upon the lines of her beautiful figure. She was speaking, but I could not hear what she said, nor could I make out the low grumblings of his reply. She stood there erect before him, her head held high, and even in the distance I was from them I could read the scorn and disgust upon her face as she let her haughty glance rest without sign of fear upon him. She was indeed a proud daughter of 1,000 Jadiks, every inch of her dear precious little body so small, so frail, beside the towering warriors around her, but in her majesty dwarfing them into insignificance. She was the mightiest figure among them, and I verily believe that they felt it. Presently, Talhajas made a sign that the chamber be cleared, and that the prisoners be left alone with him. Slowly, the chieftains, the warriors, and the women melted into the shadows of the surrounding chambers, and Dejathoris and Sola stood there before the Jetic of Tharks.
One chieftain alone had hesitated before departing. I saw him standing in the shadows of the mighty column, his fingers nervously toying with the hilt of his great sword, and his cruel eyes bent in implacable hatred upon Tall Hodges. It was Tars Tarkas, and I could read his thoughts as they were an open book for the undisguised loathing upon his face. He was thinking of that other woman who, 40 years ago, had stood before this beast, and could I have spoken a word into his ear at that moment, and reign of Tall Hodges would have been over. But finally, he also strode from the room, not knowing that he left his own daughter at the mercy of the creature he most loathed. Taha just arose, and I, half fearing, half anticipating his intentions, hurried to the winding runway which led to the floors below. No one was near to intercept me, and I reached the main floor of the chamber unobserved, taking my station in the shadow of the same column that Tars Tarkas had but just deserted. As I reached the floor, Tal Hodges was speaking. "Princess of Helium, I might wring a mighty ransom from your people would I but return you to them unharmed. But 1,000 times rather would I watch that beautiful face writhe in agony of torture. It shall be long drawn out, that I promise you. 10 days of pleasure were all too short to show the love I harbor for your race. The terrors of your death shall haunt the slumbers of the red men through all the ages to come. They will shudder in the shadows of the night as their fathers tell them the awful vengeance of the green men, of the power and might and hate and cruelty of Tal Hodges. But before the torture you shall be mine for one short hour. And word of that, too, shall go forth to Tardos Mors, Jeddak of Helium, your grandfather, that he may grovel upon the ground in the agony of his sorrow. Tomorrow the torture will commence. Tonight thou art Tal Hodges. Come." He sprang down from the platform and grasped her roughly by the arm, but scarcely had he touched her that I leaped between them. My short sword, sharp and gleaming, was in my right hand. I could have plunged it into his putrid heart before he realized I was upon him. But as I raised my arm to strike, I thought of Tars Tarkas, and with all my rage, with all my hatred, I could not rob him of that sweet moment for which he had lived and hoped all these long, weary years, and so, instead, I swung my good right fist full upon the point of his jaw. Without a sound, he slipped to the floor, as one did. He slipped to the floor as one dead. In the same deathly silence, I grasped Deja Thoris by the hand, and motioning Sola to follow, we sped noisily from the chamber, and to the floor above, unseen, we reached a rear window, and with the straps of leather of my trappings, I lowered first Sola and then Deja Thoris to the ground below. Dropping lightly after them, I drew them rapidly around the court into the shadows of the building, and thus we returned over the same course I had so recently followed from the distant boundary of the city. We finally came upon my thoats in the courtyard where I had left them, and placing my trappings upon them, we had ventured through the building to the avenue beyond. Mounting, Sola upon one beast and Deja Thoris behind me on another, we rode from the city of Thark through the hills to the south. Instead of circling back around the city to the northwest and toward the nearest waterway, which led a short distance from us, we turned to the northeast and struck out upon the mossy waste, across which for 200 dangerous and weary miles lay another main artery leading to Helium. No word was spoken until we had left the city far behind, but I could hear the quiet sobbing of Deja Thoris as she clung to me with her dear head resting against my shoulder. "If we make it, my chieftain, the debt of Helium will be a mighty one, greater than she can ever pay you. And should we not make it," she continued, "the debt is no less, though Helium will never know, for you have saved the last of our line from worse than death." I did not answer, but instead reached to my side and pressed the little fingers of her I loved where they clung to me for support. And then, in unbroken silence, we sped over the yellow moonlit moss, each of us occupied with his own thoughts. For my part, I could not be other than joyful, had I tried, with Deja Thoris's warm body pressed close to mine, and with all our unpassed danger, my heart was singing as gaily as though we were already entering the gates of Helium. Our earlier plans had been so sadly upset that we now found ourselves without food or drink, and I alone was armed. We therefore urged our beasts to a speed that must tell on them sorely before we could hope to sight the ending of my first stage of our journey. We rode all night and all the following day with only a few short rests. On the second night, both we and our animals were completely fagged, and so we lay down upon the moss and slept for some 5 or 6 hours, taking up the journey once more before daylight. All the following day we rode, and when, in the late afternoon, we had sighted no distant trees, the mark of the great waterways throughout all of Barsoom, the terrible truth flashed upon us that we were lost. Evidently we had circled, but which way it was difficult to say, nor did it seem possible with the sun to guide us by day and moons and stars at night. At any rate, no waterways was in sight, and the entire party was almost ready to drop from hunger, thirst, and fatigue. Far ahead of us, and a trifle to the right, we could distinguish the outlines of low mountains. These were decided to attempt to reach in hope that from some ridge we might discern the missing waterway. Night fell upon us before we reached our goal, and almost fainting from weariness and weakness, we lay down and slept. I was awakened early in the morning by some huge body pressing close to mine. As I opened my eyes with a start, I beheld my blessed old Woola snuggling up close to me. The faithful brute had followed us across that trackless waste and shared our fate, whatever it might be. Putting my arms around his neck, I pressed my cheek close to his, nor am I ashamed that I did it, nor of the tears that came to my eyes as I thought of his love for me. Shortly after this, Deja Thors and Sola awakened, and it was decided that we push on at once in an effort to gain the hills. We had gone scarcely a mile when I noticed that my thoat was commencing to stumble and stagger in the most pitiful manner, although we had not attempted to force them out of a walk since about noon of the preceding day. Suddenly he lurched wildly to one side and pitched violently to the ground. Deja Thoris and I were thrown clear of him and fell upon the soft moss, with scarcely a jar, but the poor beast was in a pitiful condition, not even being able to rise, although relieved of our weight. Sola told me that the coolness of the night when it fell, together with the rest, would doubtless revive him, and so I decided not to kill him, as was my first intention, as I had thought it cruel to leave him there alone to die of hunger and thirst. Relieving him of his trappings, which I flung down beside him, we left the poor fellow to his fate, and I pushed on with the one thoat as best we could. Sola and I walked, making Deja Thoris ride, much against her will. In this way we had progressed to within about a mile of the hills we were endeavoring to reach, when Deja Thoris, from her point of vantage upon the thoat, cried out that she saw a great party of mounted men filing down from a pass in the hills several miles away. Sola and I both looked in the direction she indicated, and there, plainly discernible, were several hundred mounted warriors. They seemed to be heading in a southwesterly direction, which would take them far away from us. They doubtless were Thark warriors who had been sent out to capture us, and we breathed a great sigh of relief that they were traveling in the opposite direction. Quickly lifting Deja Thoris from the thoat, I commanded the animal to lay down, as we three did the same, presenting as small an object as possible for fear of attracting the attention of the warriors towards us. We could see them as they filed out of the pass just for an instant before they were lost to view behind the friendly ridge. To us, a most providential ridge, since had they been in view for any great length of time, they scarcely would have failed to discover us. At what proved to be the last warrior came into view from the pass, he halted, and to our consternation threw his small but powerful field glass to his eye and scanned the sea bottom in all directions. Evidently he was a chieftain, for in certain marching formations among the green men, a chieftain brings up the extreme rear of the column. As his glass swung towards us, our hearts stopped in our breasts, and I could feel the cold sweat start from every pore on my body. Presently it swung full upon us and stopped. The tension on our nerves was near the breaking point, and I doubt if any of us breathed for a few moments. He held us covered by his glass. And then he lowered it, and we could see him shout a command to the warriors who had passed from our sight beyond the ridge. He did not wait for them to join him, however. Instead, he wheeled his thoat and came tearing madly in our direction. There was but one slight chance, and that we might take quickly. Raising my strange Martian rifle to my shoulder, I sighted and touched the bottom which controlled the trigger. There was a sharp explosion as the missile reached its goal, and the charging chieftain pitched backward from his flying mount. Springing to my feet, I urged the thoat to rise and directed Solon to take Deja Thoris with her upon him and make a mighty effort to reach the hills before the green warriors were upon us. I knew that, in the ravines and gullies, they might find a temporary hiding place, and even though died there of hunger, they died there of hunger and thirst, it would be better than that they fell into the hands of the Tharks. Forcing my 2 revolvers upon them as a slight means of protection and as a last resort, as an escape for themselves from the horrid death which recapture would surely mean, I lifted Deja Thoris in my arms and placed her upon the thoat behind Sola, who had already mounted in my command. "Goodbye, my princess," I whispered. "We may meet in Helium yet. I have escaped from worse plights than this," and I tried to smile as I lied. "What?" she cried. "Are you not coming with us?" "How may I, Deja Thoris? Someone must hold these fellows off for a while, and I can better escape them alone than 3 of us can together." She sprang quickly from the thoat and, throwing her dear arms around my neck, turned to Sola, saying with quiet dignity, "Fly, Sola! Deja Thoris remains to die with the man she loves." Those words are engraved upon my heart. Ah, gladly would I give up my life 1,000 times could I hear them once again. But I could not then, given even a second to the rapture of her sweet embrace, and pressing my lips to hers for the first time, I picked her up bodily and tossed her to the seat behind Sola again, commanding the latter to peremptorily, in peremptory tones, in angry tones, and told her, therefore, by force, and then slapped the thoat upon the flank, and I saw them borne away, Deja Thoris struggling to the last to free herself from Sola's grasp. Turning, I beheld the green warriors mounting the ridge and looking for their chieftain. In a moment they saw him, and then me, but scarcely had they discovered me, that I commenced firing, laying flat upon my belly in the moss. I had an even 100 rounds in the magazine of my rifle, and another 100 in the belt on my back, and I kept up a continuous stream of fire until I saw all of the warriors who had been first to return from behind the ridge either dead or scurrying for cover. My respite was short-lived, however, for soon the entire party, numbering some 1,000 men, came charging into view, racing madly towards me. I fired until my rifle was empty, and they were almost upon me, and then, a glance showing me that Deja Thoris and Sola had disappeared among the hills, I sprang up, throwing down my useless gun, and started away in the direction opposite to that taken by Sola and her charge. If ever Martians had an exhibition of jumping, it was granted those astonished warriors on that day long years ago. But while it led them away from Deja Thoris, it did not distract their attention from endeavoring to capture me. They raced wildly after me until finally my foot stuck in a projecting piece of quartz, and down I went sprawling upon the moss. As I looked up, they were upon me, and although I drew my longsword in an attempt to sell my life as dearly as possible, it was soon over. I reeled beneath their blows, which fell upon me in perfect torrents. My head swam, all was black, and I went down beneath them to oblivion. Way to go, John. Had a great day. Surprised mommy with root beer float last night. Let's go. Root beer float sounds really good. Appreciate y'all being here. Hope you're enjoying the story so far. It's getting pretty exciting. Well, for my 4 readers in here. I might finally watch the movie after this book, just to see, because I can't understand why it did so poorly. Great so far, right? I am really, really into the story. Very, very much so. Great so far. Did you see the movie, Brangus? because I haven't watched the movie. Although I did really like that actor. He was big for a while, and it felt like everybody was casting him for something. I want a root beer float now. 11 likes. Appreciate y'all. Nice. Perfect. No chill streak. Although I should go to my live chat, and I did. Excellent. Excellent. Curious to know your thoughts on it. Chapter 18. Chained in Warhoon. It must have been several hours before I regained consciousness, and I well remember the feeling of surprise which swept over me as I realized that I was not dead. I was laying among the pile of sleeping silks and furs in the corner of a small room in which were several green warriors, and bending over me was an ancient and ugly female. As I opened my eyes, she turned to one of the warriors, saying, "He will live, O Jed." "'Tis well," replied the one so addressed, rising and approaching my couch. "He should render rare sport for the great games." And now, as my eyes fell upon him, I saw that he was no Thark, for his ornaments in metal were not of that horde. He was a huge fellow, terribly scarred about his face and chest, and with one broken tusk and a missing ear. Strapped on either breast were human skulls, and depending from these a number of dried human hands. His reference to the great games of which I had heard so much while among the Tharks convinced me that I had jumped from purgatory into Gehenna? After a few more words with the female, during which she assured him that I was now fully fit to travel, the Jed ordered that we mount and ride after a main column. I was strapped securely to as wild and unimaginable a thoat as I had ever seen, and with a mounted warrior on either side to prevent the beast from bolting, we rode forth at a furious pace in pursuit of the column. My wounds gave me but little pain, so wonderfully and rapidly had the applications and injections of the female exercised their therapeutic power, and so deftly had she bound and plastered the injuries. Just before dark, we reached the main body of troops shortly after they had made camp for the night. I was immediately taken before the leader, who proved to be the Jeddak of the hordes of Warhoon. Like the Jed who had brought me, he was frightfully scarred and also decorated with the breastplate of human skulls and dried dead hands, which seemed to mark all the greater warriors among the Warhoons, as well as to indicate their awful ferocity, which greatly transcends even that of the Tharks. The Jeddak, Bar Komas, who was comparatively young, was the object of the fierce and jealous hatred of his old lieutenant, Kova, the Jed who had captured me, and I could not but note the almost studied efforts which the latter made to affront his superior. He entirely omitted the usual formal salutation as we entered the presence of the Jeddak, and as he pushed me roughly before the ruler, he exclaimed in a loud, menacing voice, "I have brought a strange creature wearing the metal of a Thark, whom it is my pleasure to have battle with the wild thoat at the great games." "He will die as Bar Komas, your Jeddak, sees fit, if at all," replied the young ruler with emphasis and dignity. "If at all," roared Kova. "By the dead hands at my thoat he shall die. Bar Komas, no maudlin weakness in your part shall save him. Oh, would that Warhoon were ruled by a real Jeddak rather than by a water-hearted weakling from whom even old Kova could tear the metal with his bare hands." Bar Komas eyed the defiant and insubordinate chieftain for an instant, his expression one of haughty, fearless contempt and hate, and then, without drawing a weapon and without uttering a word, he hurled himself at the throat of his defamer. I never before had seen two green Martian warriors battle with nature's weapons, and the exhibition of animal ferocity which ensued was as fearful a thing as the most disordered imagination could picture. They tore at each other's eyes and ears with their hands, and with their gleaming tusks repeatedly slashed and gored until both were cut fairly to ribbons from head to foot. Bar Comas had much the better of the battle, as he was stronger, quicker, and more intelligent. It soon seemed that the encounter was done, saving only the final death thrust when Bar Comas slipped in, breaking away from the clinch. It was the one little opening that Doc Kovan needed, and hurling himself at the body of his adversary, he buried a single mighty tusk in Bar Comas' groin, and with the last powerful effort ripped the young Jeddak wide open, the full length of his body, the great tusk finally wedging in the bones of Bar Comas's jaw. Victor had vanquished Victor and vanquished rolled limp and lifeless upon the moss in huge mass of torn and bloody flesh. Bar Comas was stone dead, and only the most Herculean efforts on the part of Dak Kovas female saved him from the fate he deserved. 3 days later he walked without assistance to the body of Bar Comas, which by custom had not been moved from where it fell, and placing his foot upon the neck of his erstwhile ruler, he assumed the title of Jeddak of Warhoon. The dead Jeddak's hands and head were removed to be added to the ornaments of his conqueror, and then his women cremated what remained, amid wild and terrible laughter. The injuries to Datkova had delayed the march so greatly that it was decided to give up the expedition, which was a raid upon a small Thark community in retaliation for the destruction of the incubator, until after the Great Games, and the entire body of warriors, 10,000 in numbers, turned back towards Wahoon. My introduction to these cruel and bloodthirsty people was but an index to the scenes I witnessed almost daily while with them. They were a smaller horde than the Tharks, but much more ferocious. Not a day passed, but had some members of the various Warhoon communities met in deadly combat. I have seen as high as 8 mortal duels within a single day. We reached the city of Warhoon after some 3 days' march, and I was immediately cast into a dungeon and heavily chained to the floor and walls. Food was brought me at intervals, but owing to the utter darkness of the place, I do not know whether I lay there days or weeks or months. It was the most horrible experience of all my life, and that my mind did not give way to the terrors of that inky blackness has been a wonder to me ever since. The place was filled with creeping, crawling things. Cold, sinuous bodies passed over me while I lay down. In the darkness, I occasionally caught glimpses of gleaming, fiery eyes fixed in horrible intentness upon me. No sound reached me from the world above, and no word would my jailer vouchsafe when my food was brought to me, although I at first bombarded him with questions. Finally, all the hatred and maniacal loathing for these awful creatures who had placed me in this horrible place was centered by my tottering reason upon the single emissary who represented to me the entire horde of Warhoons. I had noticed that he always advanced with his dim torch to where he could place the food within my reach, and as he stooped to place it upon the floor, his head was about on a level with my breast, so with a cunning of a madman, I backed to the far corner of my cell, when next I heard him approaching, and gathering a little slack of the great chain which held me in my hand, I waited his coming, crouching like some beast of prey. As he stooped to place my food upon the ground, I swung the chain above my head and crashed the links with all my strength upon his skull. Without a sound, he slipped to the floor, stone dead. Laughing and chattering like an idiot I was fast becoming, I fell upon his prostrate form, my fingers feeling for his dead throat. Presently, they came in contact with a small chain at the end of which dangled a number of keys. The touch of my fingers on these keys brought back my reason with the suddenness of thought. No longer was I a gibbering idiot, but a sane, reasoning man with the means of escape within my very hands. As I was groping to remove the chain from about my victim's neck, I glanced up into the darkness to see 6 pairs of gleaming eyes fixed, unwinking, upon me. Slowly they approached, and slowly I shrank back from the awful horror of them. Backed into my corner, I crouched, holding my palms out before me, and stealthily on came the awful eyes until they reached the dead body at my feet. Then slowly they retreated, but this time with a strange grating sound, and finally they disappeared in some black of distant recess of my dungeon. Weird. I am here. I am eating Demon Hunter meal. Excellent. At the McDonald's. Did you get all the cards? This guy's really good at escaping. I will say that. But you got to really question the sensibility of, just locking him up like a normal person. I mean, after a while, and his many, many shows of strength. Ooh, this should be good. Chapter 19, Battling in the Arena. Slowly, I regained my composure and finally essayed again to attempt to remove the keys from the dead body of my former jailer. But as I reached out into the darkness to locate it, I found to my horror that it was gone. Then the truth flashed on me. The owners of those gleaming eyes had dragged my prize away from me, to be devoured in their neighboring lair. As they had been waiting for days, for weeks, for months, through all this awful eternity of my imprisonment, to drag my dead carcass to their feast. For 2 days no food was brought to me, but then a new messenger appeared, and my incarceration went on as before, but not again did I allow my reason to be submerged by the horror of my position. Shortly after this episode, another prisoner was brought in and chained near me. By the dim torchlight, I saw that he was a red Martian, and I could scarcely await the departure of his guard to address him. As their retreating footsteps died away in the distance, I called out softly to the Martian word in greeting, Kor. Who are you? Who speaks out of the darkness? He answered. John Carter, a friend of the red men of Helium. I am of Helium, he said, but I do not recall your name. And then I told him my story as I've written it here, omitting only any reference to my love for Deja Thoris. He was much excited by the news of Helium's principal and seemed quite positive that she and Sola could easily have reached a point of safety from where they left me. He said that they knew the place well because the defile through which the Warhoon warriors had passed when they discovered us was the only one ever used by them when marching to the south. Deja Thoris and Sola entered the hills not 5 miles from the great waterway and are now probably quite safe, he assured me. My fellow prisoner was Kantos Khan, a Podwar lieutenant in the Navy of Helium. He had been a member of the ill-fated expedition which had fallen into the hands of the Tharks at the time of Deja Thoris's capture, and he briefly related the events which followed the defeat of the battleships. Badly injured and only partially manned, they had limped slowly towards Helium, but while passing near the city of Zadanga, the capital of Helium's hereditary enemies among the red men of Barsoom, they had been attacked by a great body of war vessels, and all but the craft to which Kantos Khan belonged were either destroyed or captured. His vessel was chased for days by 3 of the Zadangan warships, but finally escaped during the darkness of the moonless night. 30 days after the capture of Deja Thoris, or about the time of our coming to Thark, his vessels had reached Helium, with about 10 survivors of the original crew and 700 officers and men. Immediately, 7 great fleets, each of 100 mighty warships, had been dispatched to search for Deja Thoris, and from these vessels 2,000 smaller craft had been kept out continuously in futile search for the missing princess. 2 green Martian communities had been wiped off the face of Barsoom by the avenging fleets, but no trace of Deja Thoris had been found. They had been searching among the northern hordes, and only within the past few days, and they extended their quest to the south. Kantos Khan had been detailed to one of the small one-man flyers and had the misfortune to be discovered by the Warhoons while exploring their city. The bravery and daring of the man won my greatest respects and admiration. Alone, he had landed at the city's boundary and on foot had penetrated to the buildings surrounding the plaza. For 2 days and nights he had explored their quarters and their dungeons in search of his beloved princess, only to fall into the hands of the party of Warhoons as he was about to leave, after assuring himself that Deja Thoris was not a captive here. During the period of our incarceration, Kantos Khan and I became well acquainted and formed a warm personal friendship. A few days only elapsed, however, before we were dragged forth from our dungeon for the great games. We were conducted early one morning to an enormous amphitheater, which instead of having been built upon the surface of the ground was excavated below the surface. It had partially filled with debris so that how large it had originally been was difficult to say. In its present condition, it held the entire 20,000 war hoons of the assembled hordes. The arena was immense but extremely uneven and unkempt. Around it, the war hoons had piled building stones from some of the ruined edifices on the ancient city to prevent the animals and the captives from escaping into the audience. And at each end had been constructed cages to hold them until their turns came to meet some horrible death upon the arena. Kantos Khan and I were confined together in one of the cages. In the others were wild chalets and thoats, mad zittigers, green warriors, and women of other hordes, and many strange and ferocious wild beasts of Barsoom, which I had never seen before. The din of their roaring, growling, and squealing was deafening, and the formidable appearance of any one of them was enough to make the stoutest heart feel grave forebodings. Kantos Khan explained to me that the end of the day would be one of these prisoners would gain freedom and the others would lie dead about the arena. The winners in the various contests of the day would be pitted against each other until only two remained alive, the victor and the last encountered being set free. Whether animal or man, the following morning the cages would be filled with new consignment of victims and so on throughout the 10 days of the games. Shortly after we had been caged, the amphitheater began to fill, and within an hour every available part of the seating space was occupied. Dak Kova, with his jeds and chieftains, sat at the center of one side of the arena upon the large raised platform. At a signal from Dak Kova, the doors of the two cages were thrown open and a dozen green Martian females were driven to the center of the arena. Each was given a dagger, and then, at the far end, a pack of 12 callets, or wild dogs, were loosed upon them. As the brutes, growling and foaming, rushed upon the almost defenseless women, I turned my head that I might not see the horrid sight. The yells and laughters of the green horde bore witness to the excellent quality of the sport, and when I turned back to the arena, as Kantos Khan told me it was over, I saw 3 victorious callets snarling and growling over the bodies of their prey. The women had given a good encounter of themselves. Next, a Madza titter was loose among the remaining dogs, and so it went throughout the day's long, hot, horrible day. During the day, I was pitted against first men and then beast. But as I was armed with a long sword and always outclassed my adversary in agility, and generally in strength as well, it proved but child's play to me. Time and time again I won the applause of the bloodthirsty multitude, and toward the end there were cries that I'd be taken from the arena and be made a member of the hordes of Warhoon. Finally, there were but 3 of us left, a great green warrior of some far northern horde, Kantos Khan, and myself. The other 2 were to battle, and then I to fight the conqueror for the liberty which was accorded the final winner. Kantos Khan had fought several times during the day, and like myself had always proven victorious, but occasionally by the smallest of margins, especially when pitted against the green warriors. I had little hope that he could best this giant adversary who had mowed down all before him during the day. The fellow towered nearly 16 feet in height, while Kantos Khan was some inches under 6 feet. As they advanced to meet one another, I saw, for the first time, a trick of Martian swordsmanship which centered Kantos Khan's every hope of victory in life on one cast of the dice, for, as he came to within about 20 feet of the huge fellow, he threw his sword arm far behind him, over his shoulder, and with a mighty sweep, hurled his weapon point foremost at the green warrior, and it flew true as an arrow, and piercing the poor devil's heart, laid him dead upon the arena. Kantos Khan and I were now pitted against each other, but as we approached to the encounter, I whispered to him in prolonged battle until nearly dark, in hopes that we might find some means of escape. The horde evidently guessed that we had no hearts to fight each other, and so they howled in rage as neither of us placed a final thrust. Just as I saw a sudden coming of dark, I whispered to Kantos Khan to thrust his sword between my left arm and my body. As he did so, I staggered back, clasping the sword tightly with my arm, and I thus fell to the ground with his weapon apparently protruding from my chest. Kantos Khan perceived my coup, and stepping quickly to my side, he placed his foot upon my neck, and withdrawing his sword from my body, gave me the final death blow through the neck, which is supposed to sever the jugular vein. But in this instance, the cold blade slipped harmlessly into the sand of the arena. In the darkness, which had now fallen, none could tell that he had really finished me. I whispered to him to go and claim his freedom, and then look for me in the hills east of the city, and so he left me. When the amphitheater had cleared, I crept stealthily to the top, as the great excavation lay far from the plaza and in an unattended portion of the great dead city, I had little trouble in reaching the hills beyond. Okay, kind of reminded me of Spartacus. Not bad, not bad. Where are we at? About an hour and a half, 2 chapters left. Yeah, we're right on schedule. Appreciate the 11 likes. Appreciate my 4 readers in here hanging out, enjoying the story. I never read that Princess of Mars. Really? Kev's voice is storytelling time as Nana has fallen asleep and is finally resting properly. Excellent. I love that. That is my absolute pleasure. Yeah, there's 7 books in this series, and we're gonna read a few of them, if not all of them. But I'm very, very glad that y'all are here. I'm glad that Nana Katrina is finally sleeping, and let's see if we can finish strong. And then I am ready for dinner. If I had the book, I'd be reading to sunrise. Yeah, yeah. In fact, the hardest thing for me Monday night is not to end the stream and continue reading, because I decided I want to be just as surprised as all of you. So I'm reading this for the first time, if not in a long time, with y'all. So I love it. Chapter 20. In the Atmosphere Factory. For 2 days I waited there for Kantos Khan, but as he did not come, I started off on foot in a northwesterly direction toward a point where he had told me lay the nearest waterway. My only food consisted of vegetable milk from the plants which gave so bounteously of its priceless fluid. Through 2 long weeks I wandered, stumbling through the nights, guided only by the stars, and hiding during the days behind some protruding rock or among occasional hills I traversed. Several times I was attacked by wild beasts, strange, uncouth monstrosities that leapt upon me in the dark, so that I had ever to grasp my longsword in my hand that I might be ready for them. Usually my strange, newly acquired telepathic powers warned me in ample time, but once I was down with vicious fangs at my jugular and a hairy face pressed close to mine before I knew that I was even threatened. What manner of thing was upon me I did not know, but that it was large and heavy and had many legs I could feel. My hands were at its throat before the fangs had a chance to bury themselves in my neck, and slowly I forced the hairy face from me and closed my fingers vice-like around its windpipe. Without sound we lay there, the beast exerting every effort to reach me with those awful fangs, and I straining to maintain my grip and choke the life from it as I kept it from my throat. Slowly my arms gave to the unequal struggle, and inch by inch the burning eyes and gleaming tusks of my antagonist crept towards me until, as the hairy face touched mine again, I realized that it was all over. And then a living mass of destruction sprang from the surrounding darkness, full upon the creature that held me pinioned to the ground. The two rolled, growling upon the moss, tearing and rending one another in a frightful manner. But it was soon over, and my preserver stood with lowered head above the throat of the dead thing which would have killed me. The nearer moon, hurtling suddenly above the horizon and lighting up the Barsoomian scene, showed me that it was my preserver was Woola. But from whence he had come and how he found me, I was at a loss as to know. That I was glad of his companionship, it is needless to say. but my pleasure at seeing him was tempered by anxiety as to the reason of his leaving Dejah Thoris. Only her death, I felt sure, could account for his absence from her, so faithful I knew him to be to my commands. By the light of the now brilliant moons, I saw that he was but a shadow of his former self, and as he turned from my caress and commenced greedily to devour the dead carcass at my feet, I realized that the poor fellow was more than half starved. I, myself, was in but little better plight, but I could not bring myself to eat the uncooked flesh, and I had no means of making a fire. When Wula had finished his meal, I again took up my weary and seamlessly endless wandering in the quest of an elusive waterway. At daybreak of the 15th day of my search, I was overjoyed to see the high trees that denoted the object of my search. About noon, I dragged myself wearily to the portals of the huge building, which covered perhaps 4 square miles and towered 200 feet in the air. It showed no aperture in the mighty walls other than a tiny door, at which I sank exhausted, nor was there any sign of life about it. I could find no bell or other method of making my presence known to the inmates of this place, unless a small round roll in the wall near the door was for that purpose. It was it was of about the bigness of a lead pencil, and thinking that it might be the nature of a speaking tube, I put my mouth to it, and was about to call into it when a voice issued from it asking me whom I might be, where from, and the nature of my errand. I explained that I had escaped from the war wounds and was dying of starvation and exhaustion. You wear the medal of a green warrior, and you are followed by Callet, yet you are of a figure of a red man. In color you are neither green nor red. In the name of the 9th day, what manner of creature are you? I am a friend of the red men of Barsoom, and I am starving. In the name of humanity, open up to us, I replied. Presently the door commenced to recede before me until it had sunk into the wall 50 feet. Then it stopped and slid easily to the left, exposing a short, narrow corridor of concrete, at the further end of which the other door, similar in every respect to the one I had just passed. No one was in sight, yet immediately we passed the first door it slid gently into place behind us and receded rapidly into its original position in the front wall of the building. As the door had slipped aside, I noted its great thickness, full 20 feet. And as it reached its place once more, after closing behind us, great cylinders of steel had dropped from the ceiling behind it and fitted the lower ends into apertures countersunk into the floor. A second and third door receded before me and slipped into the side as the first, before I reached the large inner chamber where I found food and drinks set out upon a great stone table. A voice directed me to satisfy my hunger and to feed my Callet, and while I was thus engaged, an invisible host put me through a severe, searching cross-examination. Your statements are most remarkable, said the voice on concluding its questioning. But you are evidently speaking the truth, and it is equally evident that you are not of Barsoom. I can tell that by the conformation of your brain and the strange location of your internal organs and the shape and size of your heart. Can you see through me? I exclaimed. Yes, I can see all but your thoughts, and were you a Barsoomian, I could read those. Then the door opened at the far side of the chamber, and a strange, dried-up little mummy of a man came towards me. He wore but a single article of clothing or adornment, a small collar of gold from which depended upon his chest a great ornament as large as dinner plates set solid with huge diamonds, except for the exact center, which was occupied by a strange stone, an inch in diameter, and scintillated 9 different and distinct rays. The 7 colors of our earthly prism, and 2 beautiful rays which to me were new and nameless. I cannot describe them any more than you could describe red to a blind man. I only know that they were beautiful in the extreme. The old man sat and talked with me for hours, and the strangest part of our intercourse was that I could read his every thought, while he could not fathom an iota from my mind unless I spoke. I did not apprise him of my ability to sense his mental operations, and thus I learned a great deal which proved of immense value to me later, and which I would never have known had he suspected my strange power. For the Martians have such perfect control of their mental machinery that they are able to direct their thoughts with absolute precision. The building in which I found myself contained the machinery which produces that artificial atmosphere which sustains life on Mars. The secret of the entire process hinges on the use of the ninth ray, one of the beautiful scintillations which I noted emanating from the great stone in my host's diadem. This ray is separated from the other rays of the sun by means of finely adjusted instruments placed upon the roof of the huge building, three-quarters of which is used for reservoirs in which the ninth ray is stored. This product is then treated electronically, or rather, certain proportions of refined electric vibrations are incorporated with it, and the result is then pumped to the 5 principal air centers of the planet where, as it is released, contact with the ether of space transformations, contact with the ether of space transforms it into atmosphere. There is always sufficient reserve of the ninth ray stored in the great building to maintain the present Martian atmosphere for 1,000 years, and the only fear, as my new friend told me, was that some accident might befall the pumping apparatus. He led me to the inner chamber, where I beheld a battery of 20 radium pumps, any one of which was equal to the task of furnishing all of Mars with the atmosphere compound. For 800 years, he told me, he had watched these pumps, which are used alternately a day each at a stretch, or a little over 24 and one-half Earth hours. He has one assistant who divides the watch with him, half a Martian year, about 344 of our days, which each of these men spend alone in this huge isolated plant. Every red Martian is taught during earliest childhood the principles of the manufacture of atmosphere, but only 2 at one time ever hold the secret of ingress to the great building, which, built as it is with the walls 150 feet thick, is absolutely inaccessible, even the roof being guarded from assault by aircraft by a glass covering 5 feet thick. The only fear they entertain of attacks is from the green Martians or some demented red man, as all Barsoomians realize that the very existence of every form of life on Mars is dependent upon the uninterrupted working of this plant. One curious fact I discovered as I watched his thoughts was that the outer doors are manipulated by telepathic means. The locks are so finely adjusted that the doors are released upon the action of a certain combination of thought waves. To experiment with my new-found toy, I thought to surprise him into revealing his combination, and so I asked him in a casual manner how he managed to unlock the massive doors for me from the inner chambers of the building. As quick as a flash, there leapt to his mind 9 Martian sounds, but as quickly faded as he answered that this was a secret he must not divulge. From then on, his manner towards me changed, as though he feared that he had been surprised into divulging his great secret, and I read suspicion and fear in his look and thoughts, though his words were still fair. Before I retired for the night, he promised to give me a letter to a nearby agricultural officer who would help me on my way to Zodanga, which he said was the nearest Martian city. But be sure that you do not let them know you are bound for Helium, as they are at war with that country. My assistant and I are of no country. We belong to all Barsoom, and this talisman which we wear protects us in all lands, even among the green men. Though we do not trust ourselves to their hands if we can avoid it, he added. And so, good night, my friend, he continued. May you have long, restful sleep. Yes, a long sleep. And though he smiled pleasantly, I saw in his thoughts he wished that he had never admitted me. And then a picture of him standing over me in the night, and the swift thrust of a long dagger and half-formed words, I am sorry, but it's for the best of Barsoom. As he closed the door of my chamber behind him, his thoughts were cut off from me, as was the sight of him, which seemed strange to me in my little knowledge of the thought transference. What was I to do? How could I escape through these mighty walls? Easily could I kill him now, that as I wanted, but once he was dead I could no more escape, and with the stopping of the machinery of the great plant I should die with all other inhabitants of the planet. All, even Dejah Thoris, were she not already dead. For the others I did not give a snap of my finger, but the thought of Dejah Thoris drove from my mind all desire to kill my mistaken host. Cautiously I opened the door of my apartment, and followed by Woola, sought the inner of the great doors. A wild scheme had come to me. I would attempt to force the great locks by the 9 thought waves I had read in my host's mind. Creeping stealthily through the corridor after corridor and down winding runways which turned hither and thither, I finally reached the great hall in which I had broken my long fast that morning. Nowhere had I seen my host, nor did I know where he kept himself by night. I was on the point of stepping boldly out into the room when a slight noise behind me warned me back into the shadows of the recess of the corridor. Dragging Woola after me, I crouched low in the darkness. Presently, the old man passed close by me, and as he entered the dimly lighted chamber which I had been about to pass through, I saw that he held a long, thin dagger in his hand, and that he was sharpening it upon a stone. In his mind was the decision to inspect the radium pumps, which would take about 30 minutes, and then return to my bedchamber and finish me. As he passed through the great hall and disappeared down the runway which led to the pump room, I stole stealthily from my hiding place and crossed to the great door, the inner of the 3 which stood between me and liberty. Concentrating my mind upon the massive lock, I hurled the 9 thought waves against it. In breathless expectancy, I waited. When finally the great door moved softly towards me and I slid quietly to one side, one after another, the remaining mighty portals opened at my command, and Woola and I stepped forth into the darkness, free, but little better off than we had been before. Other than that, we had full stomachs. Hastening away from the shadows of the formidable pile, I made for the first crossroad, intending to strike the central turnpike as quickly as possible. This I reached about morning and entered the first enclosure I came to. I searched for some evidence of habitation. There were low, rumbling buildings of concrete barred with heavy, impassable doors, and no amount of hammering and hallooing brought any response. Weary and exhausted from sleeplessness, I threw myself on the ground, commanding Woola to stand guard. Some time later, I was awakened by his frightful growlings, and I opened my eyes to see 3 red Martians standing a short distance from us and covering me with their rifles. "I am unarmed and no enemy," I hastened to explain. "I have been a prisoner among the green men, and I am on my way to Zodanga. All I ask is food and rest for myself and my callet, and the proper directions for reaching my destination." They lowered the rifles and advanced pleasantly toward me, placing the right hand upon my left shoulder, after the manner of their custom of salute, and asking me many questions about myself and my wanderings. They then took me to the house of one of them, which was only a short distance away. The buildings I had been hammering at in the early morning were occupied only by stock and farm produce. The house proper, standing among the grove of enormous trees, and, like all red Martian homes, had been raised at night some 40 or 50 feet from the ground, on a large round metal shaft which slid up or down within a sleeve sunk into the ground, and was operated by a tiny radium engine in the entrance hall of the building. Instead of bothering with bolts and bars for their dwellings, the red Martians simply ran them up out of harm's way during the night. So, also, they have private means for lowering or raising them from the ground without, if they wish to go away and leave them. These brothers and their wives and children occupied 3 similar houses on this farm. They did no work themselves, being government officers in charge. The labor was performed by convicts, prisoners of war, delinquent debtors, and confirmed bachelors who were too poor to pay the high celibate tax which all red Martian governments impose. They were all personification of cordiality and hospitality, and I spent several days with them, resting and recuperating from my long and arduous experiences. When they had heard of my story, I omitted all references to Deja Thoris and the old man of the atmosphere plant. They advised me to color my body to more nearly resemble their own race, and then attempt to find employment in Zandanga, either in the army or the navy. "The chances are small that your tale will be believed until you have proven your trustworthiness and won friends among the highest nobles of our court. This you can most easily do through military service, as we are warlike people of Barsoom. We are a warlike people on Barsoom," explained one of them, "and save our richest favors for the fighting men." When I was ready to depart, they furnished me with a small domestic bow throat, such as is used for saddle purposes by all red Martians. The animal is about the size of a horse and quite gentle, but in color and shape an exact replica of his huge and fierce cousin of the wilds. The brothers had supplied me with the reddish oil with which to anoint my entire body, with one of them cut my hair, which had grown quite long in the prevailing fashion of the time, square at the back and banged in the front, so that I could have passed anywhere upon Barsoom as a full-fledged red Martian. My medal and ornaments were also renewed in the style of the Zardangian gentlemen attached to the house of Pator, which was the family name of my benefactors. They filled a little sack at my side with Zandungian money. The medium of exchange upon Mars is not dissimilar from that of our own, except the coins are oval. Paper money is issued by individuals as they require it and redeemed twice yearly. If a man issues more than he can redeem, the government pays his creditors in full, and the debtor works out the amount upon the farms or in the mines, which are all owned by the government. This suits everybody except the debtor, as he has been a difficult thing to obtain sufficient voluntary labor to work the great isolated farmlands of Mars, stretching as they do like narrow ribbons from pole to pole, through wild stretches peopled by wild animals and wilder men. As I mentioned my inability to repay them for their kindness to me, as they assured me that I would have an ample opportunity if I lived among them upon Barsoom, and bidding me farewell, they watched me until I was out of sight upon the broad white turnpike. Nice little family. Hey, how are you, Matt? Leighton, I was installing window blinds yesterday, and I also found muscles I haven't used in a while. Trying to count now. 8, my second highest age group. Nice. Saturday game, I head straight for the bath, soaked in bath salts and lavender, and relax my muscles and lunch. That's beautiful. Put me to sleep. I'm the same way. Give me a heating pad and a comfy chair, and boop, I'm done. All right. Ooh, chapter 21 already. All right. This will be the last chapter for tonight, and I appreciate the 4 to 6 of you being here with me and catching up on the story. It's so great to experience a story, but it's so much better to experience it with all of you. So really appreciate you. Let's finish tonight with chapter 21, An Air Scout for Zodanga. As I proceeded on my journey towards Zodanga, many strange and interesting sights arrested my attention, and at the several farmhouses where I stopped, I learned a number of new and instructive things concerning the methods and manners of Barsoom. The water which supplies the farms of Mars is collected in immense underground reservoirs at either pole from the melting ice caps, and pumped through long conduits to the various populated centers. Along either side of these conduits, and extending their entire length, lie the cultivated districts. These are divided into tracts of about the same size, each tract being under the supervision of one or more government officers. Instead of flooding the surface of the fields and thus wasting immense quantities of water by evaporation, the precious liquid is carried underground through the vast network of small pipes directly to the roots of the vegetation. The crops upon Mars are always uniform, for there are no droughts, no rains, no high winds, and no insects or destroying birds. On this trip, I tasted the first meat I had eaten since leaving Earth, large, juicy steaks and chops from the well-fed domestic animals of the farms. Also, I enjoyed the luscious fruits and vegetables, but not a single article of food which was exactly similar to anything on Earth. Every plant and flower and vegetable and animal has been so refined by ages of careful scientific cultivation and breeding that the like of them on Earth dwindled to a pale gray characterless nothingness by comparison. At a second stop, I met some highly cultivated people of the noble class, and while in conversation, we chanced to speak of helium. One of the older men had been there on a diplomatic mission several years before they spoke with regret of the conditions which seemed destined ever to keep these two countries at war. Helium, he said, rightfully boasts the most beautiful women of Barsoom, and of all her treasures, the wondrous daughter of Mars Kajak, Deja Thoris, is a most exquisite flower. Why, he added, the people really worship the ground she walks upon, and since her loss on that ill-starred expedition, all Helium has been draped in mourning. That our ruler should have attacked the disabled fleet as it was returning to Helium was but another of his awful blunders, which I fear will sooner or later compel Zondanga to elevate the wiser man to his place. Even now, though our victorious armies are surrounding Helium, the people of Zondanga are voicing their displeasure, for the war is not a popular one, since it is not based on right or justice. Our forces took advantage of the absence of the principal fleet of Helium on their search for the princess, and so we have been able easily to reduce the city to a sorry plight. It is said she will fall within the next few passages of the further moon. And what think you may have been the fate of the Princess Deja Thoris? I asked as casually as possible. She is dead, he answered. This much was learned from a green warrior recently captured by our forces in the south. She escaped from the hordes of the Thark with a strange creature of another world, only to fall to the hands of the Warhoons. Their thoats were found wandering upon the sea bottom, and evidences of bloody conflict were discovered nearby. While this information was in no way reassuring, neither of it was at all conclusive proof of the death of Deja Thoris, and so I determined to make every effort possible to reach Helium as quickly as I could, and carry to Tardos Morse such news of his granddaughter's possible whereabouts as lay in my power. 10 days after leaving the three Tor brothers, I arrived at Zodanga. From the moment that I had come in contact with the red inhabitants of Mars, I had noticed that Woola drew a great amount of unwelcome attention to me, since the huge brute belonged to a species which is never domesticated by the red man. Were one to stroll down Broadway with the Numidian lion at his heels, the effect would have been somewhat similar to that which I should have produced had I entered Zondanga with Woola. The very thought of parting with the faithful fellow caused me such great regret and genuine sorrow that I put it off until just before we arrived at the city's gates. But then, finally, it became imperative that we separate. Had nothing further on my own safety or pleasure been at stake, no argument could have prevailed upon me to turn away the one creature upon Barsoom that had never failed in a demonstration of affection and loyalty. But as I would willingly have offered my life in the service of her in search of whom I was about to challenge the unknown dangers of this, to me, mysterious city, I could not permit even Woola's life to threaten the success of my venture, much less his momentary happiness, for I doubted not he soon would forget me, and so I bade the poor beast an affectionate farewell, promising him, however, that if I came through my adventure in safety, that in some way I should find the means to search for him. He seemed to understand me fully, and when I pointed back in the direction of the Thark, he turned sorrowfully away, nor could I bear to watch him go, but resolutely set my face towards Zodanga, and with a touch of heart-sickness I approached her frowning walls. The letter I bore from them gained me immediate entrance to the vast walled city. It was still very early in the morning, and the streets were practically deserted. The residents, raised high upon their metal columns, resembled huge rookeries, while the uprights themselves presented the appearance of steel tree trunks. The shops, as a rule, were not raised from the ground, nor were their doors bolted or barred, since thievery is practically unknown upon Barsoom. Assassination is the ever-present fear of all Barsoomians, and for this reason alone their homes are raised high above the ground at night or in times of danger. The Tor brothers had given me explicit directions for reaching the point of the city where I could find living accommodations and be near the offices of the government agents to whom they had given my letters. My way led to the central square, to the plaza, which is a characteristic of all Martian cities. The plaza of Zodanga covers the square mile and is bounded by the palaces of the Jedek, the Jeds, and other members of the royalty and nobility of Zodanga, as well as by the principal public buildings, cafes, and shops. As I was crossing the great square, lost in wonder and admiration of the magnificent architecture and the gorgeous scarlet vegetation which carpeted the broad lawns, I discovered a red Martian walking briskly towards me from one of the avenues. He paid not the slightest attention to me, but as he came abreast I recognized him, and turning I placed my hand upon his shoulder, calling out, "Kor! Kantos Khan!" Like lightning he wheeled, and before I could so much as lower my hand, the point of his longsword was at my breast. "Who are you?" he growled, and then as a backward leap carried me 50 feet from his sword, he dropped the point to the ground and exclaimed, laughing, "I do not need better reply. There is but one man upon all Barsoom who can bounce about like a rubber ball. By the mother of the further moon, John Carter, how came you here? How have you become a Darseen in that you can change your color at will?" "You gave me a bad half-minute, my friend," he continued, after I briefly outlined my adventures since parting with him at the arena on Warhoon. "Were my name and city known to the Zardungians, I should shortly be sitting on the banks of the lost Sea of Chorus with my revered and departed ancestors. I am here in the interest of Tardos Mors, Jeddak of Helium, to discover the whereabouts of Dejah Thoris, our princess. Sab Than, Prince of Zodanga, has her hidden in the city and has fallen madly in love with her. His father, Thancosis, Jeddak of Zodanga, has made her voluntary marriage to his son, the Prince of Peace between our countries. But Tardos Mors will not accede to the demands and has sent word that he and his people would rather look upon the dead face of their princess than see her wed to any than her own choice, and that personally he would prefer being engulfed in the ashes of the lost and burning helium to joining the metal of his house with that of Thancosis. His reply was the deadliest affront he could have put upon Thancosis and the Zodangians. But his people love him, and more for it than his strength in helium is greater today than ever. "I have been here 3 days," continued Kantos Khan, "but I have not yet found where Dejah Thoris is imprisoned. Today I joined the Zodangian navy as an air scout, and I hoped in this way to win the confidence of Sab Than, the prince, who is commander of the division of my navy, and thus learn the whereabouts of Dejah Thoris. I am glad you are here, John Carter, for I know your loyalty to my princess, and two of us working together should be able to accomplish much." The plaza was now commencing to fill with people going and coming upon the daily activities of their duties. The shops were opening and the cafes filling with early morning patrons. Kantos Khan led me to one of these gorgeous eating places where we were served entirely by mechanical apparatus. No hand touched the food from the time it entered the building in its raw state until it emerged hot and delicious upon the tables before the guests, in response to their touching of tiny buttons to indicate their desires. After our meal, Kantos Khan took me with him to the headquarters of the Air Scout Squadron, and introducing me to his superior, asked that I be enrolled as a member of the Corps. In accordance with custom, an examination was necessary, but Kantos Khan had told me to have no fear on this score, as he would attend to that part of the matter. He accomplished this by taking my order for examination to the examining officer and representing himself as John Carter. "This ruse will be discovered later," he cheerfully explained, "when they check up my weights, measurements, and other personal identification data, but it will be several months before this is done, and our mission will have been accomplished, or have failed long before then." The next few days were spent by Kantos Khan teaching me in the intricacies of flying and repairing the dainty little contrivances of the Martians' use for this purpose. The body of the one-man aircraft is about 16 feet long, 2 feet wide, and 3 inches thick, tapering down to a point at each end. The driver sits on top of its plane upon the seat constructed over the small noseless radium engine which propels it. The medium of buoyancy is contained within the thin metal walls of the body and consists of the eighth Barsoomian ray, or ray of propulsion, as it may be termed in the view of its priorities. This ray, like the ninth ray, is unknown on Earth, but the Martians have discovered that it is an inherent property of all light, no matter from what source it emanates. They have learned that it is a solar eighth ray which propels the light of the sun to the various planets, and that it is the individual eighth ray of each planet which reflects or propels the light thus obtained out into space once more. The solar eighth ray would be absorbed by the surface of Barsoom, but the Barsoomian eighth ray, which tends to propel light from Mars into space, is constantly streaming out from the planet, constituting a force of repulsion of gravity which, when confined, is able to lift enormous weights from the surface of the ground. It is this ray which has enabled them to so perfect aviation in battleships far outweigh anything known upon Earth, sail as gracefully or lightly through the thin air of Barsoom as a toy balloon in a heavy atmosphere of Earth. During the early years of discovery of this ray, many strange accidents occurred before the Martians learned to measure and control the wonderful power they had found. In one instance, some 900 years before the first great battleship to be built with the eighth ray reservoirs was stored with too great a quantity of the rays, and she had sailed up from Helium with 500 officers and men, never to return. Her power of repulsion for the planet was so great that it carried her far into space, where she can be seen today, by the aid of powerful telescopes, hurtling through the heavens 10,000 miles from Mars, a tiny satellite that will thus encircle Barsoom to the end of time. The fourth day after my arrival on Zodanga, I made my first flight, and as a result of it, I won a promotion which included quarters in the palace of Thankosis. As I rose above the city, I encircled several times, as I had seen Kantos Khan do, and then throwing my engine to top speed, I raced at terrific velocity toward the south, following one of the great waterways which entering Zodanga from that direction. I had traversed perhaps 200 miles in less than 200 miles in a little less than an hour when I descried far below me a party of 3 green warriors racing madly toward a small figure on foot which seemed to be trying to reach the confines of one of the walled fields. Dropping my machine rapidly towards them, circling to the rear of the warriors, I soon saw that the object of their pursuit was a red Martian wearing the medal of a scout squadron to which I was attached. A short distance away lay his tiny flyer, surrounded by the tools with which he had evidently been occupied in repairing some damages when surprised by green warriors. They were now almost upon him, their flying mounts charging down on the relatively puny figure at terrific speed, while the warriors leaned low to the right with their great metal-shod spears. Each seemed striving to be the first to impale the poor Zodongian, and in another moment his fate would have been sealed had not been for my timely arrival. Driving my fleet aircraft at high speed directly behind the warriors, I soon overtook them, and without diminishing my speed, I rammed the prow of my little flyer between the shoulders of the nearest. The impact, sufficient to have torn through inches of solid steel, hurled the fellow's headless body into the air over the head of his throat, where it fell sprawling upon the moss. The mounts of the other 2 warriors turned squealing in horror and bolted in opposite directions. Reducing my speed, I circled and came to the ground at the feet of the astonished Zodongian, and he was warm in his thanks for my timely aid and promised that my day's work would bring the reward it merited, for it was none other than a cousin of the Jeddak of Zodanga whose life I had saved. We wasted no time in talk, as we knew that the warriors would surely return as soon as they had gained control of their mounts. Hastening to his damaged machine, we were bending every effort to finish the needed repairs and had almost completed them when we saw the 2 green monsters returning at top speed from opposite sides of us. When they had approached within 100 yards, their throats had become unmanageable and absolutely refused to advance further toward the aircraft which had frightened them. The warriors finally dismounted and, hobbling their animals, advancing towards us on foot with long drawn swords. I advanced to meet the larger, telling the Zodongian to do the best he could with the other, finishing my man with almost no effort, as I had now, from my much practice, became habitual with me. I hastened to return to my new acquaintance, whom I found indeed in desperate straits. He was wounded and down, with a huge foot of his antagonist upon his throat, and the great longsword raised to deal the final thrust. With a bound, I cleared the 50 feet intervening between us, and with outstretched point drove my sword completely through the body of the green warrior. His sword fell harmless to the ground, and he sank limply upon the prostrate form of the Zardongian. A cursory examination of the latter revealed no mortal injuries, and after a brief rest he assured that he felt fit to attempt a return voyage. He would have to pilot his own craft, however, as these frail vessels are not intended to convey but a single person. Quickly completing the repairs, we rose together into the still, cloudless Martian sky, and at great speed and without further mishap returned to Zodanga. As we neared the city, we discovered a mighty concourse of civilians and troops assembled upon the plain before the city. The sky was black with naval vessels and private and public pleasure craft, flying long streamers of gay-colored silks and banners and flags and odd picturesque design. My companion signaled that I slow down, and running his machine close beside mine suggested that we approach and watch the ceremony, which he said was for the purpose of conferring honors on individual officer and men for bravery and other distinguished services. He then unfurled a little ensign, which denoted that his craft bore a member of the royal family of Zodanga, and together we made our way through the maze of low-lying air vessels until we hung directly over the Jeddak of Zodanga and his staff. All were mounted upon the small domestic bull thoats of the red Martians, and their trappings and ornamentation bear such a quantity of gorgeously colored feathers that I could not be struck with the startling resemblance the concourse bore of the band of the red men of my own earth. One of the staff called the attention of Thancoursus to the presence of my companion above them, and the ruler motioned for him to descend. As they waited for the troops to move into position facing the Jeddak, the two talked earnestly together, the Jeddak and his staff occasionally glancing up at me. I could not hear the conversation, and presently it ceased, and all dismounted, as the last body of troops had wheeled to position before their emperor. A member of the staff advanced toward the troops, and calling the name of the soldier, commanded him to advance. The officer then recited the nature of the heroic act, which had won the approval of the Jeddak. And the latter advanced and placed a metal ornament upon the left arm of the lucky man. 10 men had been so decorated when the aide called out, "John Carter, Air Scout." Never in my life had I been so surprised, but the habit of military discipline is strong within me, and I dropped my little machine lightly to the ground and advanced on foot as I had seen others do. As I halted before the officer, he addressed me in a voice audible to the entire assemblage of troops and spectators. "In recognition, John Carter," he said, "of your remarkable courage and skill in defending the person of the cousin of the Jeddak, Thancoursus, and single-handedly vanquishing 3 green warriors, it is the pleasure of our Jeddak to confer on you the mark of his esteem." Thancoursus then advanced towards me, and placing an ornament upon me, said, "My cousin has narrated the details of your wonderful achievement, which seems little short of miraculous. And if you could so well defend a cousin of the Jeddak, how much better could you defend the person of the Jeddak himself? You are therefore appointed a padwar of the guards, and will be quartered in my palace hereafter." I thanked him, and at his discretion joined the members of his staff. After the ceremony, I returned my machine to its quarters on the roof of the barracks of the Air Scout Squadron, and with an orderly from the palace to guide me, I reported to the officer in charge of the palace. If I could afford a chair like that, I would buy one for my Nana. Hopefully we'll be able to have enough money for one. My Nana's 60th birthday in 1 year, 8 months' time. Hopefully so. Infiltrated another territory, huh? Now we're in Zardanga, and we are befriending them. But little do we know, they actually have Deja Thoris there. And so John now has a new mission. And I'm excited to finish the book in our next stream, as chapter 22 is called I Find Deja. Good way to end, not on a cliffhanger. Yes, I agree 100%. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's best to know exactly where we can pick up next time, which is him infiltrating the Air Scouts of Zodanga. So I really appreciate you hanging out with me tonight, everybody. This was a really good read. I'm really hungry, so I'm about to end this and then get some dinner and probably an early night, catch up on some sleep. But really appreciate everybody hanging out. Brangus and New Zealand Clan, Yuna hanging out, Matt Gooch lurking in the background, and everybody that came in between. Really, really appreciate you. Let me take a real quick gander and see if there's anybody currently on that we can bless with a little raid. A very, very little raid. But we are small but mighty. Pokey Boys. All right. Have a good evening. See you Thursday. Yes, I will see you on Thursday, y'all. I think tonight, just in the sake of hitting the hay, I think we're not gonna raid anybody. I think we're just gonna go ahead and I will let you all go and watch anybody that you so choose if that's your Monday routine. But I am fixing to raid some dinner, so I will let you all choose. And always remember, Ghost Fam, to go out and get everything that you set out to get, and don't let anything stop you. But it takes $0 to be a good person. So always remember, do it through peace, love, and Pokemon. And thank you all for believing in ghosts and joining me for story time. I really appreciate you. Thursday, unless he pops up sooner. True. Much love to you all, and I hope you have a beautiful rest of your night. We'll see you on Thursday.